Swedish speaker, so I'm really pleased to welcome Leonora Grcheva, Cities and Regions Lead at the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and then Stefan Persson, Head of Unit for Sustainable Governance at Tomelilla Kommun. Both speakers will give a presentation with relevant examples of how they work with these approaches. And after that, we'll open the floor for questions and dialogue. And of course, for you who are part of today's session, please do not hesitate to post questions in the chat. Both me and Helena from SustainGov will be keeping an eye on what you have put in the chat. And of course, this session will also be recorded and put on our YouTube channel if you want to go back to it. And we will be sharing the slides afterwards. But with no further ado, a warm welcome, Leonora and Stefan, and I will hand over to Leonora here initially to provide an international view of donor economics.
Thank you, Mariella. Happy to be here. So I'll share a bit. I can imagine that many of you are familiar, or at least have heard about Doughnut Economics and what it is, but for some of you it still may be either new or kind of a vague concept that you're just mildly familiar with. So I'll try and use my 20 minutes wisely to both share kind of the theory of what Doughnut Economics actually is and where it's coming from and what are the key core concepts, and then talk about the practical application, kind of drawing from the global experiences of the cities that I am privileged to kind of work with as support around the world that apply this idea into practice in local public governance. So I'm gonna share my slides. So Doughnut Economics, where it's coming from, it comes from an English economist and author, Kate Raworth, who wrote this book, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And it's about challenging some of the core concepts, the one that are at the fore of economic thought in the 20th century, and also the one that are really underpinning how we still function and think and operate in our societies, in our industries, in our economies, in ways that are kind of hidden almost. And in the book, it's done through by bringing together a lot of economic thought from feminist economics, ecological economics, development economics, and making it all also kind of coherent, but also open to non-economists such as myself, really opening up the idea of what the feel of economic is and should be. So at the core, where it's coming from essentially is a challenge from today's dominant economic ideas and the recognition that today's dominant economic systems do not work. They're not fit for the challenges, for the ecological and social challenges of the 21st century. We're seeing that we have growing inequality, we have growing social and ecological crisis, and we continue to kind of operate under the same systems that have created and perpetuate this crisis. And at the core of Doughnut Economics is the donut, this visual that is really challenging how we imagined what the goal should be in the 21st century and how we measure progress, how we measure the progress of humanity and where we're currently at. So inviting us to move away from this 20th century idea, this narrow 20th century idea that we're still kind of putting so high in the 21st century of GDP, economic growth, as a core measure of progress. We still kind of, in our nations, and then as a consequence, in our cities, in various sectors, in regions, we still measure how we're doing based on this never-ending curve of economic growth that doesn't tell us much about the quality of life of people, that doesn't tell us anything about the state of our planet. It measures things like, how much tobacco was sold and how much arms was sold and how the military industry is doing, but it doesn't actually speak to the well-being of humanity and of the human world. So it's a bizarre thing that we've chosen and continue to choose to use this as a measure of progress of how we're doing. So the donut contradicts that and kind of brings an alternative measure of progress to that for the 21st century that brings those invisible aspects of human existence on this planet to the fore. And so what is a donut? What is this compass for human prosperity? Is really these two concentric circles. The inner circle is the social foundation. So it's about making visible that all the basic needs of all people should be met, whether it's access to water, to food, to health, to education, to peace, political voice, housing, energy, all of these things that you will see from the inside. So we need to meet the needs of all people. However, while meeting them and while we use our planet's resources to meet these needs, we shouldn't overshoot the outer circle of the donut, which is the ecological ceiling. And the ecological ceiling are these 9. So if the social foundation, if the themes in the social foundations are drawn from the Sustainable Development Goals, the themes on the ecological ceiling are drawn from the 9 planetary boundaries. I imagine most of you are familiar with them as they come from a Swedish team of researchers, and we've been aware of them for just over a decade, maybe 15 years now. Kind of these planetary scale ecological Earth systems that have limits in how much pressure they can take, how much man-made pressure they can take, and that cause planetary scale consequences when too much pressure is applied. So we have climate change, of course, but also we have ocean acidification, biodiversity, land conversion, fertilizer use, air pollution, ozone layer, chemical pollution, etc. So the donut brings these two ideas together and inviting us to kind of reimagine the compass for human prosperity as meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. So that is at the core of the idea of donuts. We don't leave anybody in the hole and we don't overshoot Earth's limits. Extremely simple, and yet this is not how we're how we do anything and how we govern our places. So if that is the vision of humanity, this is the selfie of humanity right now. So based on quantifiable indicators, based on the planetary boundaries that are always being, the science and kind of data is always advancing, and on kind of global indicators chosen on the inner circle, we can see that we're still far from living in that safe and just place, kind of that green place of the donut, the safe between the social foundation and ecological ceiling. We're massively overshooting planetary boundaries, and we have billions still living in deprivation. And Kate, the author of Doughnut Economics, and my colleague Andrew Fanning, who's our research lead, just recently, months ago, published the update of Doughnut in Nature, in this article called "Doughnut of Social and Planetary Boundaries Monitors a World Out of Balance." So really updating both kind of the indicators and what we know so far through the lenses of the donut, but also monitoring kind of the trends between 2000 and 2022, as well as disaggregating it into country clusters by income level. So seeing, how our high income versus mid income versus low income countries doing through this lens. And it's not, there is some good news. I guess there's been a lot of improving. You can see in this kind of unrolled donut, the bright pink is where those social foundations have improved. However, those red wedges, the dark red ones, are where ecologically we have been worsening. And the improvements on the social foundations are not significant enough, considering how many people are still living in deprivation. So that, that's a bit of kind of a bit at what's at the core of the theory. jumping into the practice, I work at the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. It's this small organization that Kate co-founded 5 years ago in response to people in various sectors of practice, whether it's local government, whether it's grassroots organizing, or schools, started picking up these theoretical concepts and inventing ways in which they can be practically useful. So our lab was formed as a way to support all this emerging practice, to jointly experiment, to guard the integrity of the concepts while kind of supporting innovation and experimentation. And so we're very much a lab, and we operate by supporting in all these various sectors. And I'm going to focus on my role and on this area, which are local governments or cities and regions. In practice, we're continuously learning what it means to be working with Doughnut economics in cities and regions. And I'll kind of give a bit of a glimpse and some insights, and then Stefan will deep dive into the case study of Tomelilla. But really, it's been kind of a combination of tools that we've been creating at Deal that kind of give some starting points, some methodologies, some entryways and possibilities, and then cities learning, experimenting, innovating in action, and then learning from one another. So what we try also to kind of to convene and support is what we're doing here today as well. It's these exchanges and inspiration so that each next city can learn from the other, from the best precedents before them, and not reinvent the wheel every time, but kind of support this international network of innovation, essentially. So we now are at a point where there's been over 50 local and regional governments at all scales, from small towns, villages, and municipalities to kind of mega cities. They're very different scales of public authorities that have worked with Doughnut Economics in various ways, and some still continue to work, whilst for some it was kind of a part-time project and work that was happening at some point. And this map is not updated. I will update it as we continue to welcome new cities into the fold. We just spoke to Vienna yesterday, speaking of new cities getting started this month with the ideas. And the big idea, let's say, behind the practice is, the big question that the Doughnut help us ask is, how do we move from those red wedges that to where we are today towards a safe and just future where nature and humans are thriving in balance? And what are the changes, that we can use these 7 ways to help us articulate, but we can use a whole lot of many other ideas and models, the systemic changes we need, and in how we think and work today in order to change our future tomorrow. And while cities may be sharing kind of this common goal, the contexts are so wildly different, from the policy context to the financial and the political and the social, ecological, geographical, of course. So the practice of Doughnut economics, since we don't prescribe, well, this is what you got to do. It's a step-by-step thing. You got to do this specific thing. It's a very open and flexible and innovative framework that allows for a lot of adaptability and contextualization. And so the practice looks very different from place to place. And we've mapped out kind of learning, and this is from a recent journal that I'll share, that I co-authored, to kind of map the landscape and the early learnings of local governments, of these 50 local governments. We see these 5 main clusters of type of practice of bringing Doughnut economics into practice. So data, working with data, kind of based on that, that selfie, the database selfie, and downscaling the idea of that into local governance, decision-making, budgeting, prioritization. Places using it as a strategic compass at a high level political level. Sector or project-specific visioning, so meaning deep dives into specific sectors, specific strategies, individual projects, and using the concepts for visioning, for driving that. For dialogue and co-creation, participative processes inside and outside, and many places have been using it specifically for impact assessment and decision making. And most places use many of these things at the same time. Most places start somehow, wherever they're at, whatever their opportunity and possibility and will, and energy is at the moment, and then gradually identify opportunities as they learn and experiment. And they're like, okay, now we're reviewing this strategy. Oh, wait, now actually we're doing this project. Maybe that's an opportunity to make it a demonstrator project. Or wait, how about if we turn, if we transform how we do this entire thing? So it kind of evolves organically in each place. So I'm going to share don't have too much time. I'm going to share a few case studies from these different kind of deep diving into these clusters of practice and trying to connect it and bring a bit about the systems perspective that Doughnut Economics brings and how it connects to many areas of practice within local governments, and particularly those that are kind of at the core of sustain that are health and well-being within planetary boundaries. So that that systemic perspective. So this is an example from nearby. And all examples are imperfect. Everybody's experimenting now. So Copenhagen has been experimenting themselves. They've kind of introduced, they did a lot of internal work and study, and they've introduced, they're currently experimenting with using, kind of publishing a yearly Copenhagen Doughnut report. So it's sort of a state of a place report that they do annually. They've done it 3 years in a row. This is the latest, in which they assess how they're doing as a place across social and across the social indicators and across ecological indicators. So kind of replacing, and the idea is that this sort of replaces various annual reports, but in a way that allows to inform decision making, to essentially inform budgeting, to inform political negotiations across departments, to inform strategic priorities, to help identify strategic areas of need. So you're like, where are our biggest, reddest wedges? How can we collaborate and design projects across them to address them all, etc. On the right are kind of other examples of other database, what we call portraits of places, city portraits, or neighborhood municipality portraits. And the idea of this, even though this is a very much a data-based entry point, but the idea is to be bringing as well throughout conversation and throughout many areas of sectoral work that systemic perspective. So like in which they try to kind of open and support to nurture through these reports as well, where they're bringing this Doughnut economic perspective and a way to think about issues that can very often end up stuck in silos. As I'm sure you're all aware, it's a common issue, and it's a common challenge in local governments for issues to end up siloed, for resources to be for different departments to have to fight over the same resources. And this is encouraging, the Doughnut in itself by nature is encouraging looking at the whole picture. So if we're looking at the children and nature, of bringing children to nature, recognizing and putting it in practice, this perspective of, well, what does it mean? This is, bringing kids into nature is a very important aspect of kind of improving physical and mental health and well-being, improving their relationship with nature. But it's also about education and learning. But at the same time, it's a risk about impact on the natural resources, depending on how many people and how many kids access where. So how do we bring in those holistic perspective by kind of having the Doughnut as a common compass that allows us to have those conversations from many angles? Another example is from a place where I'm kind of this cluster of practice that I call place-wide strategic compass. So this is in Glasgow in Scotland. And they kind of started from the data perspective, but then they kind of evolved that more differently into developing this sort of a long-term vision that they've nested into the Glasgow Doughnut. And in the Glasgow Doughnut, they're bringing this perspective that we encourage, that we have a methodology for, that we call the 4 lenses, where we're saying, not only should we be looking at a local scale when downscaling the donut, not only we should be looking at the social foundation and ecological ceiling, but we must look at the same time at the local aspirations and the global responsibilities of our places. So the four lenses are local, social, and local ecological. So that's how our people in our town, in our city, municipality doing, and how are our natural ecosystems doing, and what is our impact on them. But the global responsibilities is what is our impact on the climate change, biodiversity loss, the rest of planetary boundaries through our consumptions, through our energy use, through our lifestyles here. And the global social perspective is what is our impact on the well-being of people elsewhere through those patterns. So how can we bring into visibility, into awareness, and into action the fact that we are an interconnected world depending largely on imports, on raw resources, on products from elsewhere in the world, and we bear and should bear responsibility for the conditions of people down the supply chains, for the impacts that we have on communities whose labor and land we extract from. So bringing in all those perspectives into this kind of united vision is something that they're doing in the Glasgow Doughnut, and essentially through a lot of participatory workshops and workshopping and conversations, they developed their thriving Glasgow definition. So through each of these thematic areas in the social and ecological area, looking at what is our definition of thriving, what is our long-term goal, how do we want to look like long-term, and then what could this look like for Glasgow? So not thinking about the short term, not thinking about the next year or like a 3-year scenario, but what is ideal? What is that ideal goal that we're looking towards? And then in Glasgow, they have this big partnership between the city and the University of Glasgow. That's kind of a whole systems research project where they're really bringing in the systems perspective and using the donut as an anchor for it. So how do you understand, study, and then take action on and bring into decision making the interconnected dynamics between all of these themes is something that they're really working on. What are the connections between the different themes, and how can we look at different policies, different decisions, different projects? Like this example on the left is active travel in the city. How can you unpick that through these four lenses and really understand the impacts, not just on health and well-being, but also on the environment, but also looking at the raw materials, and also looking at the development of practices and of culture, etc. So bringing this broad perspective of thinking and breaking the silos of kind of work. And another example is they're trying to map a lot of the strategies and policies in the cities in this massive systems map, kind of helping to understand, to build a big systems understanding of how the different policies and strategies across the city interact. I know I'm crossing my time already, so I'm gonna skip this case study and wrap up. Just to kind of some insights from the practice of many places of what are some perspectives and slow shifts we're seeing that Doughnut Economics help nurture and bring about in public governments from what we've been learning and what we've been hearing from cities. So we've been seeing it helps break silos. So it helps bring this whole systems integrated perspective into policymaking, but also into cross-departmental relationships and works and kind of new sort of pathways of working. It helps to recognize the limit to growth. So it really brings the planetary boundaries and that acceptance of, we're not compatible with endless economic growth, with endless use of resources. There are limits to our planet. So how do we bring that through different processes? It brings long-term thinking and visioning, so kind of beyond political cycles and through the long-term perspective. It brings the impact beyond administrative boundaries. So through that global responsibility, it kind of stretches our understanding of when we're talking about our cities and towns and municipalities, we need to understand that our impact does not end where the red line of our administration is. It goes far beyond. So how do we recognize that? And global justice, environmental justice is about recognizing that as well. And finally, it brings playfulness and imagination, something that I've underestimated for years and years, and now I'm finally trying to understanding to value, not just because these are just some images from the workshop we did in Tomelilla when we were designing local government artifacts from the future, from garbage. And not only it was fun, and not only public governance is and should be fun, but we need to be stretching our imagination muscles. We need to do things differently. We need to do policy making differently. Our muscles for imagination are atrophied by doing the business as usual for years and for decades. So it's an actual practice of kind of change that Doughnut by default, with its playfulness, it's a pastry, it's a fun way to talk about economics, it's visual, it brings about that kind of, opens up those pathways of doing public governance a bit differently. So these are just some resources where you can deep dive more, a more kind of research article about local governments, and a kind of a guide with deep dive case studies, and I'll stop there. Sorry for the few minutes extra, Mariel.
Thank you so much, Leonora. That was an amazing first stab at Doughnut Economics for those who haven't heard about it before. And we'll, of course, continue discussions after we heard from Stefan. I just want to ask you one quick question before we leave the floor to Stefan, and that is, what do you perceive as the biggest misconception around this framework and Doughnut Economics when applied in a sort of public government governance setting?
It's such a good question, Mariel. I'm not sure I have an answer that's not for answer, and I'm sure Stefan can build on that as well. There are many. There are many strands of misconceptions. One is that there's a doing the donut. There is a way to do this that is quite linear and defined. So it's misunderstanding the flexibility and very broad definition of what it means to use freely these ideas and tools in a way that you can adapt. That's one big misconception. Another one is that it's compatible with the business as usual, that it's compatible with economic growth, that it's compatible with capitalism, and it isn't. It allows us to challenge the old ideas. But then the third thing on the other side of it, the third misconception that I hear a lot is also this idea, well, how come you're doing Doughnut Economics, but here you are still doing old practices and still, doing this that is wrong, that is wrong. And I think everybody here from local government will understand transition is messy and long and complex, and starting to work with various ideas doesn't mean that you've suddenly transformed everything. It means that you're opening up pathways for transformation and challenging, but it's a long way to go.
Fabulous. Super interesting replies there. We'll come back to those in a short while. I think there's a lot more that to be explored. And before that, we'll let Stefan explain exactly what's been happening in Tomelilla. You were starting off with this framework quite early on, as we saw in your picture, Leonora. So we're excited to hear about it. Now, Stefan is going to do his presentation in Swedish, and Leonora knows all about Tomelilla, so you won't mind. So over to you, Stefan.
Tack så mycket, och tack för att jag blev inbjuden till det här, och väldigt spännande att höra Leonora också. Jag har haft lite datorstrul, fick byta dator mitt i alltihopa, så jag hoppas att jag kan dela här nu också. Annars får Helena hjälpa mig att dela, ser det ut som. Eller nej, vänta, nu ska vi se. Nej, Helena, du får hjälpa mig att dela, för den har inte följt med i nya datorn.
Då gör jag det. Det tar en sekund. Så.
Ja. Vi hade ett tekniktest precis innan vi körde igång, och då funkade kamera och allting, och sen 1 minut in i mötet så kraschade min kamera och dator, så jag har bytt dator medan Leonora har pratat här. Ja. Men jag kan börja med att presentera lite. Alltså, Tomelilla är ju en liten kommun på Österlen. Vi är 13 500 invånare ungefär. Landsbygdskommun utan större stad. Närmaste staden är Ystad, och sen är det Malmö-Lund-regionen som är pendlingsavstånd. Vi har börjat jobba med det här sedan 2021 ungefär, och det har varit en långsam process, väldigt utforskande. När vi får upp presentationen här så kommer ni till att se också att jag börjar egentligen inte med att berätta om vad vi gör med Munkmodellen, utan mer vad vi har gjort innan vi började med Munkmodellen, för det är rätt så väsentligt i sammanhanget. Speciellt som jag antar att det är en hel del från offentlig sektor som lyssnar här. Ja. Du kan hoppa till bild 2 direkt så fall när vi får upp den. Där, ja. För det är liksom någonstans var vi började, det var att vi fick en kommundirektör och en politik som var väldigt inriktad på att vi ska jobba tillitsbaserat och vi ska jobba med innovation och vi ska utveckla vår verksamhet på det sättet. Och då började vi vår resa från att gå från väldigt målstyrt till principstyrt. Du kan byta sida igen. Det här, de som jobbar i offentlig sektor känner igen de här principerna förmodligen, för det är från tillitsdelegationen som var en statlig delegation som jobbade mycket med att införa tillitsbaserad ledning och styrning i offentlig sektor. Det satte sig mer hos vissa än andra, men hos oss satte sig väldigt mycket, så vi styr väldigt mycket efter de här principerna just nu. Och lyfter framförallt då fram medborgarfokus och helhetssyn som någon form av principer som bör genomsyra allt vi gör. Jag kan hoppa fram igen. Jag kan byta bild, Helena. Där. Det innebär bland annat att vi har en förvaltning, vi jobbar decentraliserat med beslut, vi försöker rensa i byråkratin och köra det vi kallar antipilot. Vi jobbar väldigt ämnesbaserat i nätverk. Vi har precis bland annat precis utbildat mer än 30 personer som barnrättsstrateger som jobbar liksom på tvärs av hela förvaltningen. Och sen jobbar vi väldigt mycket med innovationsportföljer och innovativa projekt också. Så det är den grogrunden som vi började titta på. Hur kan Munkmodellen passa in här? Vi kan byta bilden. Rent konkret så började egentligen när jag började i kommunen för snart 5 år sedan. Jag började samma dag som ett livskvalitetsprogram antogs i kommunen, så vi är lika gamla i kommunen. Programmet var en ersättning av miljödokument och folkhälsodokument där vi la samman dem i ett och samma program och flyttade fokus från just miljö och folkhälsa till det här komplexa begreppet livskvalitet. Och det är väldigt subjektivt. Det är ju liksom livskvalitet för mig och er och en multisjuk äldre eller ett förskolebarn. Det ser väldigt olika ut. Så där, det är både mer komplext och mer subjektivt. Så där kände vi någonstans att vi behöver följa upp det på något annat sätt än hur vi har följt upp tidigare program. Och sen tillkom klimatprogrammet också som är väldigt kort säger att vi ska hålla vår andel av Parisavtalet. Det programmet är väldigt tydligt. Vi har en klimatbudget som håller på att ta slut och vi har väldigt tydliga mål vad vi ska nå fram till 2045. Medan livskvalitetsprogrammet är mycket mer viljeinriktningar, värdeord. Ett väldigt kul dokument att jobba med men väldigt svårt att följa upp eftersom det inte är väldigt konkreta mål i det. Vi kan byta bild där igen. Det var där vi började titta på, skulle Munkmodellen kunna vara ett uppföljningsverktyg till livskvalitetsprogrammet? Vi fångades framförallt av det här med att den kan användas som en kompass, att den är väldigt visuell och den kopplar ihop ekologiskt och socialt i ett och samma som Leonora har berättat om här. Så det är just den här kompass- och principdelen som fångade oss i den och vi började utforska då hur skulle vi kunna använda den 2021 och fortsatt försöka bygga in den i vår styrning sen dess. Du kan byta bilden. Principerna började vi jobba mer med efter vi hade jobbat med visualisering, men ju mer vi jobbade med dem desto mer förstod vi också att de passar ju rätt så bra in i hur vi redan jobbar. Om du klickar igen så får vi fram principerna från tillitsbaserad ledning och styrning som ligger väldigt mycket i linje med Munkmodellens ekonomiska principer. Det handlar ju om att se komplexitet, det handlar om att se människan, det handlar om att se hela det ekonomiska systemet, inte bara vår egen ekonomi eller nationalekonomin eller kapitalismen. Så det handlar ju också om hushållsekonomin och liksom ta vara på resurserna helt enkelt. Och samtidigt dela med sig av öppenhet och sätta människan i centrum. Så för oss, ju mer vi har jobbat med det, desto mer klickar det in i hur vi egentligen jobbade från början också. Jag kan hoppa fram igen. Det vi har gjort än så länge det är att jobba med som sagt uppföljningsverktyg, följa upp livskvalitetsprogrammet och klimatprogrammet. Nu fick vi fram något annat här, eller var det bara hos mig det kom fram? Ja. Min dator krånglar här, men så jag ser presentationen på en annan dator nu. Men där, sen har vi jobbat med beslutsstöd också med en ny skolområde, så jag kommer väldigt kort att gå in på de här 3 olika områdena där vi har jobbat. Du kan klicka igen. Som nämnt så jobbar vi med att följa upp livskvalitetsprogrammet och Det gör vi numera i ett kommunporträtt. City Portrait som Amsterdam var först ut med att göra. Där vi tittar på utifrån hela, alltså planetära gränserna, sociala fundamentet, hur ligger vi som kommun till? Och tittar på, använder alla de data vi har egentligen. Så vi har inte en hel massa nya data, men vi placerar in dem på ett nytt sätt och ser helheten i det. Det tog oss 3 år att få fram det här kommunporträttet, för det var helt nytt för oss att jobba på det sättet. Normalt så jobbar vi med kollada som är liksom stoppljus, där man är grön om man är bland de 25% bästa kommunerna i landet och röd om man är bland de 25% sämsta. Men här fick vi tänka om, precis som Leonora var inne på, men vad skulle det innebära för oss att vara i den här trygga, rättvisa zonen? Då räcker det inte att vara bland de 25% bästa, då måste vi liksom tänka om och tänka, ja, men som skolan till exempel, ja men då ska ju alla barnen ha bra betyg, alla ska må bra, alla ska vara närvarande och sådana. Det räcker inte att vi når upp bland de 25% bästa. Så på det sättet så var det ett nytt tänk för oss. Det här är en integrerad del i vår styrning nu. Det här kommunporträttet går upp i politiska sammanhang samtidigt som årsredovisningen går upp. Så när vi klubbar årsredovisningen i kommunfullmäktige i juni så klubbar vi kommunporträttet samtidigt. Dock inte i samma ärenden, det jobbar vi på att få in, men samtidigt i varje fall. Du kan hoppa fram igen. Det andra är att nu när vi har liksom uppföljningen på plats, att vi faktiskt får fram det här kommunporträttet med var vi ligger till här och nu, så vill vi knyta ihop det med beslutsstöd också, att få ett ännu bättre beslutsunderlag. Vi jobbar redan väldigt mycket med 4 linser som Leonora berättade om. Vi jobbar också väldigt mycket i workshopformat, både lite längre workshopserier men också brainstormar. Vi har till exempel haft en brainstorm omkring laddinfrastruktur. Hur ska vi i kommunen jobba med laddinfrastruktur? Det kan ju handla om liksom, var sätter vi laddstolpar till elbilar. Men genom att göra en brainstorm med de här 4 linserna så får vi betydligt bättre perspektiv. Vad betyder laddinfrastrukturen för jämställdheten? Vad betyder den för miljön, biodiversiteten? Och så får vi ställt alla de där viktiga frågorna för att ta ett mer holistiskt hållbart beslut. Men vi jobbar också med att ta fram ett digitalt beslutsstöd som ska kunna fungera till egentligen alla våra beslut i kommunen. Där vi ska kunna få det som ett underlag i både stora och små politiska beslut. Och där är vi väldigt inspirerade av Cornwall som visar exempel här på bilden. Som har utvecklat ett väldigt använt beslutsstöd. Nu är de lite större än oss, men det är mer än 400 medarbetare som har använt det här verktyget minst en gång och flera har använt det flera gånger för att ta fram beslutsstöd. Just den här bilden är från en vandringsled där de då har gått igenom en mängd frågor och fått det här utfallet. Att ja, men förväntade utfallet vid det här beslutet gör att Munkmodellen blir påverkad. Så. Du kan klicka igen. Så det vi jobbar på just nu, det är liksom att knyta ihop hela beslutsprocessen. Vi har liksom den här ögonblicksbilden med kommunporträttet, det är här vi ligger just nu. Vi jobbar med att bygga in det i både styrdokument och i beslutsstöd. Workshopsmässigt gör vi redan. Digitala beslutsstödet är på gång. Vi ska faktiskt testa det första demo nu i eftermiddag, så det är väldigt spännande. Så vi hoppas på att lansera den under våren internt också. Så här handlar det om att bygga ihop hela beslutscirkeln och alla som jobbar i offentlig sektor vet hur komplext det här är. Alltså vi har ju väldigt många mål och styrstrukturer redan och nu introducerar vi en ny. Det vi har sagt redan från början är att det här är ett väldigt utforskande arbete och vi har inte en politik som har ställt sig upp och sagt att vi ska bli en munkmodellkommun, utan det kommer från tjänstemannaperspektiv att användas som ett utvärderingsverktyg först. Och sen har vi sagt att vi testar och ser vad det funkar, vad ger det mervärde och sen får det växa in i organisationen organiskt. Och sen 2021 när vi började jobba med det så har vi alltså, överallt där vi har testat det så har det funkat och vi känner att det ger mervärde och fler kommuner är engagerade i att jobba med Munkmodellen som någon form av kompass och principstyrning. Jag kan klicka igen. Rent konkret från oss från tjänsteperspektiv så var det ett väldigt stort steg när politiken plötsligt tog beslut om att vi ska bygga en helt ny F6-skola och renovera vår enda högstadieskola. Där politiken tog beslut om att den här skolan ska planeras med hjälp av Munkmodellens principer. Så det var egentligen det första tydliga politiska beslutet att vi ska jobba med Munkmodellen. Och där är vi en bra bit på vägen nu. Vi har gjort en masterplan, en grov skiss där vi bakade in Munkmodellen, och nu har vi upphandlat vem som ska bygga skolan och vem som ska rita skolan, och Munkmodellen är i väldigt hög grad i processen, samtidigt som det är en väldigt komplex process och väldigt stor investering för oss, så vi får se hur långt vi kommer med det, men det har varit ett väldigt intressant arbete så här långt. Du kan klicka igen. En av de grejerna vi började med knyter an till det Leonora var inne på också, att verkligen engagera dem vi är till för, framförallt de kommande generationerna som måste återkoppla till naturen. Det här är lite av en väldigt enkel men innovativ upphandling. När man påbörjar projekt så brukar man göra en naturvärdesinventering för att se vilka naturvärden finns i området redan, vilka är värda att bevara. Det gäller både växter och djur. Större kommuner har experter i det. Vi brukar ta in konsulter när vi gör det, och i det här fallet så ställer vi krav på konsulterna att de ska inte bara göra en inventering utan de ska göra det med 2 skolklasser. Så de höll på en hel dag tillsammans med 2 skolklasser och göra en inventering, och det blev en väldigt fin artikel i lokalmedia. Och det är precis de här värdena vi vill stoppa in i processen och jobba vidare med. Barns delaktighet, hållbarhet, återkoppling till naturen. Så det var ett väldigt viktigt, om än litet, så väldigt viktigt steg i utvecklingen av skolprojektet. Jag kan klicka igen. Vi har också jobbat med framsyn tillsammans med barnen också. Det här är också från lokal media. Precis innan skolan började i höstas så engagerade vi några barn till att snickra tillsammans med Växtverket, en ideell organisation i Malmö. Där de faktiskt snickrade en fysisk munk som har blivit en plats för att hänga och plats för diskussion. Den är precis utanför våra praktiska lokaler på högstadiet också, så högstadieeleverna brukar hänga där. Och det var ett sätt att visualisera och involvera barnen samtidigt. Jag kan klicka igen. Där vi är just nu tillsammans med Skanska och Liljevall, så är de som ska hjälpa oss att faktiskt bygga skolan. Det är att vi är inne i att titta på hur certifierar vi, hur ser vi på att den faktiskt blir hållbar. Och det är ett väldigt komplext projekt. Det är både nybyggnation och renovering. Där har vi landat i att vi högst sannolikt kommer till att certifiera oss med svanenmärkning, som är en etablerad, känd certifieringsmärkning. Men där vi då samtidigt har konstaterat, Skanska, Liljevall och vi var väldigt snabba med att säga att svanen är bra, men det täcker inte hela holismen i det här. Framförallt det sociala fundamentet är där stora brister om vi verkligen ska prata hållbarhet. Så där håller vi på att ta fram egna kriterier som kompletterar svanen, så att vi får svanen och munkcertifiering i den här processen. Jag kan klicka igen. Bara för att avrunda, så en stor del av det här är ju också nätverkande. Just den här bilden är från Skåne Tranå, som är en av våra mindre orter, där vi faktiskt samlades i Doughnut Economics Action Labs, alla kommuner och regioner som jobbar väldigt aktivt med det här. Vi träffas, förra året träffas vi i Bad Nauheim för första gången, och i höstas träffas vi då i Skåne Tranå. Och vi som liten svensk kommun är ju vana vid att nätverka med grannkommunerna, de andra skånska kommunerna via SKR. Men här får vi ett globalt nätverk av kommuner som jobbar på samma sätt som vi och engagerar på samma sätt som vi. Så det är väldigt fascinerande hur lätt vi hittar varandra. Vi träffas såklart även digitalt och vi har väldigt mycket utbyte. Den här digitala beslutsstödet till exempel, det började med att vi såg ett behov av det. Sen frågade jag Leonora, är det någon som har gjort någonting? Och hon hänvisade oss till Cornwall, och vi fick bra kontakt med Cornwall. Och just nu så sitter IT-konsulterna som har hjälpt dem att utveckla beslutsstöd, hjälper oss att utveckla vårt beslutsstöd nu. Så det är så på det sättet som vi nätverkar på ett väldigt, väldigt konkret och väldigt spännande sätt. För oss så har det varit en fantastisk resa och vi kommer att fortsätta med den. Det har hjälpt också med hur vi förankrar i politiken, att vi har fått väldigt mycket uppmärksamhet. Du kan klicka igen. Vi trodde när vi började med det här att vi skulle få lite uppmärksamhet, för vi visste att vi var rätt så tidigt ute, men vi har fått enormt mycket uppmärksamhet, vilket är ovanligt för en liten kommun. Kunde inte i vår värld föreställa oss att vi skulle hamna i The Guardian och en hel sida i DN Och vi får förfrågningar, inte varje dag men väldigt ofta, omkring hur gör ni, vad gör ni, och kan vi komma till och många frågar sig, men hur har politiken mottagit att ni jobbar med det här, och är de med på banan? Och för mig så är det väldigt svårt att säga, eftersom vi har fått så otroligt mycket positiv uppmärksamhet, så är politiken väldigt positiva till det också. Men i vilken mån det är för att det är Munkmodellen, och vilken mån det är för att det är positiv uppmärksamhet, det vågar jag inte svara på. Det är lite hönan och ägget där förmodligen. Den klickar igen. Ja. Jag tror nästan det var... Ja, men bara för att avrunda. Sen fick vi, för att koppla in till System Gav också, vi fick en fråga om vi ville vara med i System Gav väldigt tidigt när vi höll på att skriva första ansökan. Och då var det ett utkast till mission redan som blev den ni ser här. Och för oss var det väldigt, väldigt enkelt att hoppa på, för det ligger väldigt nära både Munkmodellen och hur vi vill jobba i övrigt. Om vi klickar, ja, så ser man ju väldigt tydligt att det här är holism. Det handlar om välbefinnande, det handlar om planetens gränser, det handlar någonstans om att se helheten med människan i centrum. Så för oss så jackar det här ihop med tillitsbaserad ledning och styrning, det jackar ihop med våra kommunala strategidokument, och det jackar ihop med vad vi redan gör med Munkmodellen. Så för oss så är det här fantastiskt att kunna koppla ihop alla de här delarna. Och därmed avrundar jag min del.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Fascinating stuff. Of course, we have lots of questions. I think everyone listening to this, I mean, it's an incredible journey you've been on as a municipality, a small municipality in Sweden. We have got a question in the chat, so I just want to ask that to you, and that is the relation between Doughnut Economics and other types. I mean, you mentioned those, Leonora, initially. So well-being economics being the specific case here. I mean, what differences do you see, or commonalities?
I mean, I would say they're sister concepts, and there are different ways in which people kind of conceptualize the relationship. They're conceptually very aligned, and some people, I know they were using the metaphor of well-being economy as kind of the overarching blanket or the umbrella, and then Doughnut Economics as being one approach and one set of tools and methodologies to be bringing well-being economy into life. And we always say that each place needs to be working based on, anchoring into what works, what resonates there. So there's certainly a lot of places that kind of work under the well-being economy concepts, and then, as part of that, they could be bringing in the Doughnut, or they could be using it in the background as a way to kind of extend and bring new ideas. And we have worked together also with my government and policy colleague, Xiaoting, worked with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance on jointly developing a policy well-being economy for policymakers course. So really, it's kind of co-developed by us and well-being. So it's sister concepts, let's call them.
So I have a question for you both, really, because I think it's probably for many who sit here and think, this is really interesting, we'd like to try it. I mean, what do you see as kind of necessary capabilities that you need to develop in the public sector in particular in order to sort of engage meaningfully with this concept of Doughnut Economics? I mean, how easy is it to just kind of start using it, or do you also need to kind of develop new capabilities?
You go, Stefan. I think it's better to speak from a very place.
Yeah, well, everything that has to do with public sector steering is complex, but I think there's a very simple way to start with Doughnut Economics in your organization, and it's just workshopping. The 4 lenses Leonora was talking about, you can put pretty much any question within that concept and just try and workshop it with your closest colleagues and see what happens. That's my recommendation, to just get started and let it grow from there.
Do you see any, I mean, this is perhaps a question to Leonora, but also I'm interested in hearing your view. I mean, are there any sort of common implementation challenges that keep coming back independently of context, or are they quite context specific?
There's of course there's challenges, and we kind of surveyed on that. If you go and check out that article that I shared, and you'll be able to get the link of, you can see kind of what people responded, what places responded are some of the challenges. Some common ones, there are a lot of challenges that are very context based and specific. Some common threads are resistance to novel ideas altogether. So resistance to introducing anything that's outside, that's unfamiliar, and that challenges kind of the business as usual from kind of leadership or from the same level within administrations. And there's also the administrative resistance to new processes, to kind of like a sort of a fatigue around like, oh, well, is this just going to be another thing that we need to do? You know, I have already all my responsibilities and all my reports and all the things that I need to do, and are you making me do? So a lot of people that have been introducing new ideas, even though if the idea is to reduce all of that and to break those silos, but because of like experiences, bad experiences throughout years, people can have an initial so those are some common challenges, and maybe, you know, for those that work with data, because they bring new perspective, you know, thinking about planetary boundaries, thinking about global responsibility, there's challenge in finding the right type, the new type of data that maybe doesn't exist at a local scale, that's still methodologically being developed. So new ways to be thinking in terms of data about these things.
Thank you. So we have a hand up from Mats Helander. Mats, do you want to ask a question?
Okay, yeah. It's based on the question about the relation between Doughnut Economics and well-being economy. As I'm a part of the well-being economy alliance in Sweden, I thought that I might say something about that. And I do completely agree with Leonora. They are very, I will not say similar, but they are very coherent with each other. And let's say that the difference, I would put it like that the Doughnut Economics is a set of political economics, a specification what we need to change when it comes to economic. Well-being economy is more focused on a set of values. What do we want to obtain in the society? And there could be many different ways of solving those problems or achieving the goals. Especially, I would say that there are many different, because the system is so complex that you can't actually point out a specific way, exactly as Leonora said. You must focus on the goal and try to go in that direction. So well-being is very much more focused on a set of values.
So thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Leonora and Stefan, you know, Sustain Gov is here for 10 years, and we have high ambitions, as you know. So if we were to work in this way, which is, you know, a systems approach, what would kind of a donut-aligned public sector look like 2035 in your view?
You go first.
You start, Stefan, and then I'll go.
That's a tough question. Well, I think maybe we don't have the complete answer, because economics don't give you the answer how the society will look like in the future. It is like as I told you, it's more like a compass and principles that has to be in place for us to move into the donut. So I think the principles has to be in place, and the steering model has to be towards the donuts. But exactly how it would look, I wouldn't dare to tell you that. So please fill in, Leonora.
I mean, you're right that we shouldn't dare to tell, because if there's something that we should learn, is that there should be no generalized answers that apply broadly to the very different places of the world. But I mean, if there are some shifts, like I think we need to be redesigning local governments altogether in order to be kind of aligned with the donut and to kind of work towards living in that safe and just space. I don't think our local governments were designed for complexity. They were not designed for systems thinking. They're very different from, Tomelilla to maybe London or Mexico or Bangalore, but they're also very similar. They're organized in sectors, in departments, in linearity, in like divided budgets, etc. So we need something completely different in terms of organizational design, and kind of that's more led by complexity, emergence, uncertainty, kind of relational ways of working within and outside with citizens. And that's a lot more blurred in terms of administration and citizenry and the rest of kind of organizations and industries, academies, researchers that operate in a territory. Those are the set of principles, but then how that formalizes into something is something I'm just like really looking forward to seeing gradually emerge in practice.
So short answer, it will not be status quo. So we will look different from today, at least, even though we don't exactly know the end destination, right? If I understood you correctly.
I would say for sure. I would say for sure.
Perfect. So I want to thank you again for your really interesting presentations and really interesting discussion. I can see that a lot of people are thanking you as well in the chat here. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I hope that we will keep in touch and we will continue to learn about this. Obviously, Tomelilla is part of SustainGov, so that is very convenient from our perspective. I also want to, for everyone who's part of today's discussion, I want to also say that we have a learning lunch next week as well. And that is on the topic of systems design to reduce the perceived regulatory burden of farmers, particularly farmers who are focusing on milk production. That's fascinating work ongoing right now. So we will share some takeaways from that next week. So please follow us on our website. We have a newsletter if you're interested. We also have, of course, a LinkedIn channel. So we'll publish important news there as well. And everyone who took part in this discussion today, of course, will get copies of the presentation. So with that said, thank you so much, and see you next time.